All right. So I guess I'll just jump into this. Basically, I found these videos. One of them's older, one of them's more recent, from Soft White Underbelly, and they're documenting a couple of cases from these gentlemen who are estranged fathers. And so there's certain things in this, in both of these videos, and I happen to watch them, concurrently or whatever, that or consecutively. I don't remember whatever. So there's certain elements of this video in these videos and these testimonies that I can kind of relate to, being a father who is estranged and treated hostilely in the family court system in California. So that part of it, is familiar to me. But both of these guys have an element in their story that's a little bit different. And this is having to do with their children potentially being trans or going through transition. So there's that element in there. And there's a lot of misinformation pushed in these videos that I identified right off the bat. But I think the most important thing to kind of disclaimer here is, Soft White Underbelly, Mark, he just does interviews with people. So he's not endorsing these views, right? He tries to get people to open up about their experiences and whatnot. And he does all different types of people. So this isn't like anything against the channel or the way he does things. But these interviews are just particularly problematic for a number of reasons. But there's also there's various things that we look at where these guys are either misinformed themselves or at least are conveying wrong information about certain things, and so I thought that was important to get out there. Wow, hello, I see Tog, William Freeman, My Awesome Life. Good to see everybody. So we'll start with this one on the bottom here, and then we'll move to the other interview. Actually, we'll start with the older one. I'm going to try and skip through the beginning portion because the kid is in the beginning of the video, and I don't want to. I feel like that's, you can go look it up, but I don't want to show it on here. All right, let's see if we can get back. Not go. Yeah. There.
So, Jeff, you are going through something. You've been going through something that is probably a father's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Tell me when this started.
Started when my son was about 2 years old. My ex-wife, who's a pediatrician in Capel, Texas, put a stop to that. She filed for divorce and used her relationships with care providers to force me out of my house.
Story. Obviously, we're only getting one side of the story here. He claims that his partner, the mother of his child, identified the child as trans at 2 years old, which I find to just be ridiculous. I don't think there's any possible way that somebody can reach that conclusion if that's true, but I'm not entirely sure that it is, but that's his story.
So I moved about a mile up the road from my sons. She filed for divorce formally, and I had 50-50 custody of him. And just after his third birthday, I took the first iPhone video I'd ever taken, and it was him telling me that he thought he was a girl because his mommy tells him a girl. You can go on YouTube and just search for "Mommy Says I'm a Girl." You'll find that video.
Yeah, which is the video they play at the beginning that I omitted here.
She was telling him things like, she would put him into timeout and say, "Don't be a boy. The monsters only eat boys," and weird things like this. And she began to then socially transition him, and that led to a titanic battle in the state of Texas that culminated in me getting the procedures outlawed in Texas. And the political establishment in Texas allowing her to come to California so she could still castrate him even though I got it outlawed.
had your son, you have two sons.
I have two sons, James and Jude. They're twins. They're not identical. James is the one that she's transitioning.
And was there any sign in James that he was open to this or showing signs that he wanted to be anything other than?
Well, you know, it's interesting. So he was directly asked that by counselors and stuff. But let me just tell you about one of the fundamental facts of the case that a lot of people find shocking. James never presented as a girl with anyone but his mom. At church, with me, with his friends, he dressed as a boy and called himself James. He only presented as a girl with his mom. And I asked...
That's very problematic. If it's performative to please one parent, there's definitely, I mean, that would be an issue, right? But the courts apparently disagree with this. So we're hearing this guy's version of the story, right? If the courts in Texas allowed her to leave with the child to continue to pursue this, right? It seems like we're probably not getting the whole story here, but I don't know.
One time, why are you doing that? And he just flat out told me, he said, well, mommy doesn't love me if I'm not a girl. And that's what he told the counselors too. James is a very talented boxer. I'm a boxer, my dad was a boxer. James is extremely talented. Jude's a wrestler, but James is a very talented boxer. Olympic talent scouts were looking at him. He's that good. And they backed away from him once this all got started. He has all boy friends. Now, he has some things that you might say are feminine. He likes art. He particularly likes painting.
Art and painting are feminine, according to this guy. So that's that's a weird, so this guy's view of the world is skewed, right? Because art is feminine in this man's mind.
And
so
pastels. My son Jude likes sculpture, James is also more...
But sculpture as opposed to painting is more masculine? I don't, how does that track? I don't know.
Extroverted and is willing to play with almost anybody, and he will definitely play with girls. He'll play tag with girls. He'll build things with girls. He has no problem hanging around with girls. But in terms of having a desire to be a girl, he consistently told me for 10 years that he had no desire to be a girl. He told the court-appointed counselor want to wear dresses, and they initiated a CPS investigation against me.
An age-appropriate thing? If he's embarrassed to wear dresses to school, I mean, that's already going to be unusual, especially depending on where you are. But a young boy, if he's wearing dresses to school, it isn't, you know what I mean? Isn't presenting feminine. It would be less weird if they were actively presenting feminine across the board, right? But if it's just wearing dresses to school, and are they uncomfortable because of the reactions they get from other people, right? Or is that an internalized feeling?
For forcing him to be a boy in my 7th CPS investigation.
And do you have contact with your sons now?
No, I'm disallowed all contact with my sons.
You're not allowed to even contact?
No. And I'll tell you how this all sort of built up.
And presumably these are teenagers, so they probably have a choice in whether or not they want contact, and have chosen they don't want contact at this point, because he's talking about events that have apparently long since passed. It's kind of, he said over 10 years, but we don't really have a clear indicator of how old the kids are now at the time of this video.
So she started transitioning him, really hardcore at 3. I mean, where she presented him to the world.
Hardcore transitioning at 3. See, I don't think there's any, there would be no medical treatment going on, nothing like that. I mean, when you say you started transitioning, you're talking about introducing concepts, which I don't know that it would be appropriate to begin this with a 3-year-old, right? And you shouldn't be pushing those concepts on them anyway. They should, arise organically in the person's mind. This is my understanding of gender dysphoria is it occurs to them without other people trying to influence it. You know what I mean? It helps once you get older and you have a label to express the thing that you're feeling, right? But you identify the feeling first internally and then try to explain what that feeling is, if it's gender dysphoria, right?
With a fake girl's name and everything. This, of course, would have been an important component in the divorce that was going on. So we get to 2017, and we have our divorce trial, and we had a custody evaluator. His name is Blake Mitchell. He practices out of Frisco, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. And he asked me, what is your top issue? And I said, my top issue is she's tampering with my son's gender identity. So he charges me $60,000 and does a 1-year investigation of my family, interviewing my children over and over again, everything, and determines that she was not transitioning my son to a girl. He straight up lied to the court and said that I had made...
Right? Did he lie to the court, or where, was the mother actively, attempting to transition the child, or was she informing them that transness exists? What was the deal there? LOL Art. Mikey Susur, good to see you. He sounds like a very troubled son who needs his dad more than ever. Mom has been a very bad mother. And maybe. We don't really know. It doesn't sound like this kid has many problems other than the problems between the parents that we can identify. Nothing that we know about here, right? The major issue is whether the child is trans, so that the parents disagree on that, and apparently can't agree on a method of diagnosis or treatment either. I'm cutting out. They say a person begins feeling gender dysphoria at 2 years old. I'm not disputing they might feel it, but how would they even be able to express that? How would a 2-year-old describe feeling gender dysphoric? Very young children are often doing, experimental things, right? Like wearing, the parent of the opposite sex's clothes or something like that, right? But they're still in a state of play. There's no seriousness about it. So they could say they feel like a boy or a girl on any given day, right? And it doesn't really mean anything because kids just say stuff, and it's not necessarily meaningful. They're playing with concepts. They don't have a firm foundational view of the world.
False accusation against her for saying that she was trying to transition my son to a girl. And on that basis, I lost 50-50 custody and got less than standard possession time. So I basically got, 4 to 6 days a month with my sons. So that's how the divorce ended, with the psychologist just outright lying. Now, I've been lucky with these psychologists that lie. I've been able to prove they've lied, so the court actually set aside his report. But that's what he actually told the court in his report. So she then starts really ramping up it again, and now he's wearing makeup to school. He's using the girls' restroom at his elementary school, which was Pinkerton Middle School in Coppell, Texas. I got that school shut down. That school doesn't exist anymore in Coppell. They shut down. Got rid of the principal there. Her name is Miss Mickelson, who's the one that really...
Everything I don't like, see, and it's guys like this, see, he's very proud of himself. He's like, oh, I got the law changed. I got the school shut down. I got the principal fired, right? Very pleased with himself. Well, I mean, honestly, what was your objective? Was your objective to do all those things, or was your objective to have a, a meaningful, relationship with your child? Right? Because obviously that didn't work for you.
Transition my son. And I found out after 2.5 years, they had been transitioning my son secretly behind my back. So I would bring my son to Pinkerton Middle School in Coppell in boys' clothes, because he wears boys' clothes with me. And they would give him a dress and tell him to use the girls' bathroom.
So now he's giving us conflicting information. On the one hand, he's claiming that the child was embarrassed to be, at school in a dress or whatever, and not fully committed. But now they're saying, no, you're the problem. We're doing this in secret because you are the problem as a father, that your child doesn't feel comfortable presenting feminine in front of you, right? The rest of the world isn't the problem. It's just you.
And when I found that out, I filed grievances against the public school. And of course, they exonerated themselves, saying that under their nicknames policy, they're allowed to call him whatever he wants. And they're allowed to put him in dresses because he wants to wear it and it doesn't harm him in any way.
Yeah, so they're not putting your child in a dress. Your child is choosing to dress that way, and they're doing it behind your back because you're a bigot.
And so there was just no place to go. It's virtually impossible in Texas to sue a school district because they have sovereign immunity. So this kept ramping up with my ex-wife until finally I look in the medical records with, my ex-wife chose a pediatrician, Dr. Jennifer Pape, in Flower Mound, Texas, where I live. And Dr. Pape, in the medical records, it says that her and Miss Georgilis, my ex-wife, were planning on chemically castrating James at age 8 or 9. That's plain black and white in the medical records.
Is that chemically castrating? Is that what they're doing? Are they talking about? See, they always do like what puberty blockers first, right? Because that's puberty. You don't castrate somebody at puberty. That's nobody does that. That's false. I just know that like I've talked in any conversation I've had regarding this issue, nobody serious talks about castrating somebody before puberty or doing any type of bottom surgery or genital mutilation or anything like that, right? That's just a false claim. Mikey says, how does a person explain to family, friends, and acquaintances that you're more like your mom feelings-wise, but a lot more analytical like dad? Well, I mean, that's just, the way people are, right? I think we just embrace one side or the other, right? But we're all going to have inherent qualities from our parents like that might be more, like gender typical or whatever. Regia says, this guy so far is sounding very vindictive and that everyone should be thinking exactly like him. Yeah, absolutely. He's got a chip on his shoulder for sure. And I can understand on the one hand, as being a person, a parent who is alienated from their child, right, is it's a horrible experience, right? But to go back and double down and be like, say, oh, I'm always right, this is proof, that's going to further alienate your child from you. Like, it's just going to make things exponentially worse for you to continue on this crusade. Like, obviously, it appears to me the child is probably functional, trans person in society, and this man is clearly not accepting that, right? He's going back over all the ways the system screwed him and his ex-wife screwed him and not accepting his child's identity. And seems to be the fundamental problem here. But he will never admit that throughout the course of this. Tug says, I don't know, children can't sign contracts. Do they know if how they dress is harmful? I don't think a mode of dress can be harmful. Like, I don't even think like the school dress codes or whatever, like, I understand why they exist. I don't think that they're necessarily, you know what I mean? Like, okay, you shouldn't be wearing like gang attire at school. Well, why? Well, they would say that, this is going to increase gang violence within the schools. But I don't think that's necessarily true. The kids are just going to find another way to signal. So dress is just, one mode of expression that they are suppressing in the school system. Because, and frankly, it's true, it can be distracting from the actual, educational objective. Like, not physically, circumcision might count. Yeah, circumcision is technically genital mutilation, but almost every Christian in America agrees with that. Don't gangs have flags? Some of them do. They have colors, they have symbols. They find all kinds of creative ways to express that they're part of a gang.
So obviously I start to vociferously oppose this. I try to get a new pediatrician. I have to go to court to try to get a new pediatrician. That leads her to file another lawsuit against me for sole control of James.
So they were, at what age were they looking to do this?
At age 8 or 9, they were going to chemically castrate him, yeah.
And I've interviewed many people who have transitioned.
Yes.
And the majority of them, like I would say 98% of them, are not castrating. They're just choosing to be.
See, and he's actually pushing back here. The majority of them, 98% of them, aren't doing this at all, let alone at age 8 or 9. Like, what you're saying is preposterous.
Just cross-dressing, yeah.
Basically, they're cross-dressers who are saying that they're women.
Yes. We used to call it transvestitism. We don't do that anymore.
They keep changing the name.
Yeah. In my view, they've invented.
Well, you're talking about 3 different things, like a transgender person, transvestite isn't even a commonly used term anymore, but right, just a person in drag, and then there's shit. Why can't I think of the term right now? A person who is born with both characteristics, like at birth, right?
A kind of identity around this, but that we can talk about that. But with
transsexual, yeah, that's why I don't know why I couldn't think of it. Esoteric game with common sheep players.
With what the pattern that you see is with boys, it's mothers transitioning prepubescent boys, and they put them on puberty blockers. And there's a simple reason that the gender doctors have to put these kids on puberty blockers.
So now he's saying, okay, it's actually puberty blockers. So it's not chemical castration, is it? Those are two different things. Are you lying, or are you what's going on? Right?
And the reason is puberty is the cure for gender dysphoria. Puberty is when you come to grips with your gender role, and you either become gay or a boy. Right? 98% of the time, they just become normal boys.
That's when the testosterone kicks in.
That's right.
And you become.
That's right.
A boy who chases girls.
That's right.
For the rest of our lives.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they have to block puberty to extend the gender dysphoria in order to get them into the pipeline for the surgeries. And so they're.
I don't know if that's true. I've heard trans people say that some of the most traumatic experiences they have are around the time of puberty, because that's when the body changes, the hormones change, so significantly, and the brain doesn't necessarily keep up, right? The brain can't keep track of everything that's going on because hormones start to take control of your thought process. So I don't know. He sounds very uninformed with that statement.
There's a money pipeline with these clinics. Each child that goes on puberty blockers becomes a $4.5 million lifetime income stream for the clinics. And they're residual income streams, so that they can have hundreds of them at the same time. So they're making.
So conspiracy theory, hold the presses. He thinks that essentially the medical industry is going to profit off of having more trans kids, so they're creating them. Okay.
Hundreds of dollars a year, hundreds of millions of dollars a year off of these kids. So they block puberty to stop the cure, because puberty is the cure for gender dysphoria. And I believe puberty is.
He says puberty is the cure for gender dysphoria. As far as everything I've heard from people who've transitioned through all walks of life, right? No, the only cure for gender dysphoria is transition, right? Accepting your identity as a trans person and living that way. Right, that's the cure for gender dysphoria, as far as I know. Presenting as the gender that you identify with.
Actually, human right. Puberty is when you become fully human. Puberty is when your brain matures. You get a rational faculty, an adult.
So, according to this guy, now, puberty is when you become fully human, which is just ridiculous, right? What are you talking about? Either life begins at the moment of conception. You're a fucking human as a zygote. You're a human as a baby. You're a human as an adolescent, and you're human as an adult. But no, this guy's like, no, you're not fully human until you hit puberty and reach the age of reason. Which are not necessarily like things that happen at the same time, right? It's a generalization. It's not true for every child. But he needs to make things simple, right? For him, the world has to be very simple, no complexities. Complexities, they just confuse us. It's not, linear for this male here. Yeah, my awesome wife says at no point is this dude considering the child's happiness. No, it's all about his feelings, not his child's feelings. And he's even going so far as to try to claim to know how his child felt. Right? Like, that's essentially what he's doing here. He's like, no, I know how my kid feels. This is all just, bullshit. So it's troubling. It's very troubling. He did a lot of this to himself. Mikey says this guy just started talking out of his ass. LOL. Boys and girls go through their own experiences, and parents need to be more comforting and understanding. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a time for that, and this is one of those issues where anybody trying to unduly influence a child, right, is going to cause more problems. And there are times when it's like that, where you have to let the child find out for themselves. And if you try to exert influence, you're going to create a further trauma. Tog says, good point. Kids can be goofs, just not fools. A little of both. We all do foolish shit as kids. Can you imagine, Last Life says, can you imagine your father being so against your truth? Yeah. Almost like a helicopter parent. Yeah, and his story, it just doesn't add up. Once again, he's got this conflicting claim about whether or not his child wanted to present as the opposite gender, and it appears very much so that they did, and that because he was the only person who this was being, hidden from, he thinks it's all a conspiracy against him, right? Not for the well-being of his child, against him. It's all personal, right? This is how narcissists think. It's all about me.
Faculty.
Oh, hello, Viking Silver Wolf. Good to see you.
It's when you come to grips with your roles and your duties in society, which is the marker of a mature adult person, someone who can assume those duties in a benevolent way, right? It's when your body matures, as what a shame it would be for these young men. I mean, they'll never know, these young men that went on puberty will never know the grace and power the male body is capable of in its youth. They'll never know that. And what a shame to miss that. That confidence that comes from that carries on into middle age. And that's where you get entrepreneurship and the risk-taking in America. It's from the physical experiences. That's why sports are important in America for men. It builds a certain kind of...
There's just like all kinds of convoluted ideas thrown in here. No. These are all right-wing talking points, right? But it's true. There is higher association with risk-taking in young men who are full of testosterone and go out and do all these risky behaviors, which could correlate to making, these really, whatever, like remarkable decisions in business where they invest in some, like unknown company or whatever, and then become millionaires or something, right? That's one end of the spectrum. But the other end of that spectrum is, people going out and committing violent crimes and robberies and stuff like that. That's also associated with that high risk, high testosterone correlation there.
Character. All of that stuff is what puberty is. And so I consider it a human right. It's essentially denying a child the full development of their rational faculties, their emotional faculties, and their physical faculties. And so I think it's an actual human rights violation. So anyway, this thing just like goes crazy.
It's a human rights violation. Do we have the right to puberty? Well, he's going to say we do. So.
Right, where she's trying to transition him. They're talking about castrating him at age 8 or 9.
They're talking about castrating him at age 8 or 9. There's no actual plan to do so because he's lying about that. We know that no reasonable medical doctor would say that.
So I immediately go full court press in Texas to get this made illegal. And it took me 6 years to do it, and hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own money. The entire Texas Republican establishment fought me on it. They did not want to take a vote on this. And the reason for that may surprise you. The transgender movement was started by Republicans, was not started by Democrats. Yeah, we could talk about that.
Yep. Another political conspiracy move.
The donor class of the Republican Party did not want this outlawed. That's why all these Republican governors were vetoing these bills when they would pass them, and in Arkansas and Alabama, Mississippi, and so forth. So I immediately start lobbying to do this, and I have to use grassroots organizing because I can't rely on the moral conscience of the legislature because they're being paid by these donors that don't want it to be made illegal. So that's the first thing. And then we go to trial in 2019, 255th District Court under Judge Kim Cooks. The top transgender experts in the world show up in this little courtroom, worldwide media. So I'm an Orthodox Christian. So
of course you are. Of course you're an Orthodox Christian. What else would explain? No way. You don't say, bro. Todd says, I worry about that with my goons. I love them. Yeah. And, as a person who loves your kids, I mean, I would just say being accepting is like the first step that you take, right? Like accepting that they are individuals. They're going to make different decisions than you, and you're not always going to have the answers, and just learning to be okay with that and meet them where they are, right? Because your kids are not you. Toxic's gotta let them learn to fly. Oh, my awesome life. What a shame. Yeah.
James's story went all over Eastern Europe, even into Russia, all over the place, because these are Orthodox countries that are formally Christian countries. Their state religion is Orthodox Christianity. And they think of Texas as being in the Bible Belt. So they're like, how does this happen to an Orthodox boy in Texas? Like, it didn't make sense. So it was a story that was that had legs.
So because you're Orthodox Christian, now you're identifying your child as an Orthodox boy? No, it doesn't work that way, bud.
All over these Orthodox countries. So we had international media there. It was a circus.
That's nice.
So we had international media there. It was a circus. So I had Dr. Levine as my expert. He founded the first gender clinic in America in Johns Hopkins University in 1974. And after 4 years, in 1978, they shut their clinic down because their data showed that their treatments were harming patients. And we know now, the data that's coming out of Children's Hospital here in LA, the data that the University of Texas at Austin, which is as liberal as Berkeley, by the way, just put out a comprehensive meta-study showing that these treatments actually harm patients. The CAS report in the UK, which is the largest systematic review ever done in any psychological discipline in the history of psychology, found it harms patients. Every meta-study and systematic review finds that these treatments don't work and they actually harm patients. So he's the one who testified for me. They had Johanna Olsen Kennedy, who at that time was running LA Children's Hospital Gender Clinic. She doesn't anymore because of a huge scandal in which she has been hiding data. She was given an NIH grant to study outcomes for children on these treatment programs, and she showed no benefit in her data for the treatment programs, and she chose not to release the data because she said it would be used by opponents of transgender medicine. That's the state of science in the transgender world.
Yeah, there's different people who have different views on when is, the best time to transition. Part of the philosophy behind delaying puberty is that the child could make a more informed decision without the influence of hormones that begins at that point, right? I don't know. I mean, I would really I would be inclined to talk to people who've experienced this. I heard a lot of, the stories that I've heard, the people that I've talked to are people that have transitioned later in life and basically say, oh, I wish I would have known about this when I was younger, or this would have been available to me when I was younger, because it would have prevented a lot of hardship in my life, right? It's basically the gist of the story that I hear most of the time. Mikey says, it's absolutely true based on our own experiences and others. Parents don't have all the answers, and as long as they can learn along with their kids, familial relationships will continue to get, I think that would be improvement, yeah. Good afternoon, Christian Carpenter, good to see you.
So she came in, I deposed her, I did a video deposition with her, and I asked her one question, and the other side dropped her as an expert. And here's the question I asked her, and her answer says everything you need to know about the other side of this issue. I said, what is your medical justification for amputating healthy body parts from children? She said, if they cause psychological distress, they're not healthy body parts.
Is that even a legitimate question? Who's talking about amputating healthy body parts from children? Because according to him, they're talking about a chemical intervention, which wouldn't be an amputation, right? But even it was. So this goes back to the talk I was talking about foreskins earlier. What is your justification, Orthodox Christian, for cutting the perfectly good foreskin from a newborn baby, right? You don't have any better justification. So I don't see how this doctor gets removed based on this question, or why this question is even necessarily considered relevant, right? It's not something that has been done. It's not something that they're discussing doing in this case. So this is completely fallacious, right? But it's going to be compelling to the court.
Opposing counsel was a woman, was in the room. She threw her pen on the floor and quit the case. She left. It was so disgusting. And they were not going to put her in front of a Texas jury saying that. So they dropped her. So I won the 2019 trial. I got 50-50 custody. I got no child support. But the most important thing is I got a check on all medical procedures. So she could not chemically castrate him at age 8 or 9. Okay. By a few years later after this, I successfully got a law passed which outlawed these procedures. You could lose your medical license for.
This is just based on his work. We don't have any evidence that we were actually going to do this. My awesome life says, okay, dude's got a medical doctorate. Sure, I'll take my advice from him. And Tog says, not all Christians cut the skin off, though. Yeah, fair enough. Just like most of them, right? I mean, it's just the majority. If ortho bros are cut, I'm not checking either. Right? Show me your foreskin, sir.
These things. So in that
I love the part, there's like a part of the Bible where they're like accepting foreskins as payment for something, like they're using it as currency. I think that's amazing, like dried foreskins. Imagine just hand somebody a handful of foreskins.
intervening 2 years
In Texas.
in Texas. In that intervening 2 years, the judges, the liberal judges in Dallas County, Texas, got very upset that I got 50-50 custody and that James is not going to be transitioned. So they sua sponte moved my case from the 255th District Court into the 301st District Court with Judge Mary Brown, who I'll henceforth call Bloody Mary Brown. Judge Bloody Mary Brown never gave me
Trumpian, yeah. I call her Bloody Mary because she's the butcher.
50-50 custody, never gave me a check on the medical procedures,
She bathed in the blood of children.
and never eliminated my child support. She completely ignored the jury verdict. And over a period of about 3 years, she systematically stripped me of all parental rights. And she used a technique
That's the difference between a civil court and a family court, my friend.
that's very common in family court. First of all, she gave me an order that I couldn't follow. That's what they'll do. They'll give you an order that you just can't follow. So I was running for office in Texas. I ran for a Texas representative in House District 63. And I was in the middle of a campaign. And she issued a gag order on me, which gave me a lifetime ban on doing any podcast interviews, writing any newspaper articles, doing blog posts, posting videos, appearing in YouTube videos. It's a totally unconstitutional gag order. It also prohibited me from talking about 3 political topics. I could not talk about transgenderism, gender dysphoria, or gender expansiveness. And I was
Yeah, they don't want you talking about your child or issues pertaining to the case, right? Because it may adversely affect your child. And the courts are set up to protect the children in that case, right? And just to protect you from influencing other parties who might later be party to that case for whatever reason, right? So this is just quite standard, like family courts, like here in California, it's closed proceedings. There's no, what do you call that? There's no like record, there's no transcripts kept, right? So it's all, and I find that very frustrating too. Because I went back and found the judge contradicting themselves from what they had said in a previous, they had previously stated in those court proceedings. And I came back and they said something contradictory to that. I said, well, where is the evidence of that? Because I know that you said this, right? But there's no transcripts. There's no evidence that it actually happened. So then they can go back and say, oh, no, I didn't say that. Or, well, now I'm saying this, and it doesn't matter, right? Because we don't have the transcripts from that case. But essentially, all these orders are supposed to be put in place to protect the children who are the subject of the case. Tog says, if a Christian is circumcised, they have to follow the law of the Old Testament as part of the rite. Good to know. What about me? I'm unchristian but circumcised. I don't know. Am I obligated to anything there, or did somebody just make a mistake? My awesome laugh says, oh, let's call her names because she didn't give you what you wanted. Yeah, she saw right through your shit, right? Yeah, and once again, it's all about him. He's not thinking about how this might affect his child later on. It's all about him in this moment. And he's still living there. He still lives in that moment, right? Because this is all, everything he's talking about is historical. This is in the past. This has been judged on, right? It's clear, it's evident by the fact that his children are of the age where they can decide whether or not to talk to him, and they choose not to talk to him, right?
prohibited in public from telling anyone whether my son was a boy or a girl. Well, obviously, if you're running for office and your campaign platform is outlawing transgender surgeries on kids, you can't follow this order. And she very well knew I could not follow it. So I didn't follow it. I gave interviews. My campaign materials referenced the transgender issue and everything. So that's the first thing she did. The second thing she did is she...
You could have followed it. You chose not to because your campaign was more important than the ongoing proceedings for your children.
She reasoned, and this is a classic family court tactic. So I have an illegal gag order, right? She literally reasoned this way verbally in court. She said, well, there's this illegal gag order, this gag order that you say is illegal, Mr. Younger. It's prima facie illegal. But the illegal gag order was entered in the best interest of your children. So by not following the illegal gag order, you're not acting in the best interest of your children. And on that basis, gave me supervised visitation. And this is a very common tactic that judges use in family court as well. And we'll get to what happened in California. It was just used on me yesterday at 9:30 Texas time. And we'll talk about that. So, and it's about free speech as well. Because they know that's what'll get you. What they try to do in family court is they try to find out what the father can't do or won't do. And then they construct orders which forces him to violate the orders. And then they take his kids from him. That's how it works. So I had 3 principles when I started that I said I was going to follow because, you know, I needed some kind of moral guide here. So I said, 1, I'm never going to hurt my son. They're never going to, no matter what they order, I'm never hurting my son. That's number 1. Number 2, I'm never going to morally miseducate my son. I'm never going to tell him things that are morally incorrect. I will never miseducate him in that way. And 3rd, I said I would never let my resources be used to hurt him or morally miseducate him.
So it's sad because in this man's mind, right, he's saying he doesn't make the connection, right, that by misgendering his child, he is hurting them. That by continually speaking out against this when, it's not doing anything positive. It makes him feel better. It makes him feel morally righteous, right? But at the end of the day, all it does is hurts everybody else involved. And he doesn't make that connection. He's just so self-righteous.
So those are the 3 principles way back in 2017 that I wrote down. It's in my office. Like I live by those principles. So they gave me supervised visitation with forensic counseling services in Dallas County. Notice that I name names. And I name names in every interview, and they've never sued me for defamation because I can prove everything I'm saying is true, and truth is an absolute defense against defamation.
You can't defame a fucking government organization. That would be anti-First Amendment. That's where you're getting confused. Sorry, I missed what's going to be done for this dysfunctional family. Yeah, no, the case is pretty much closed on this one. This guy's beating his fist against a brick wall. The Christian carpenter, only if you get it done by choice. Most guys get it done nowadays right after they're born. Oh, we're talking about circumcision. Yeah, forced at birth. Like me, I didn't have a choice. It was done like literally like while I was in hospital. I think right after I was born. So it's illegal. Yeah. People often, and so I do have issue with this, right? People believe certain things about their parental rights that aren't necessarily true as a matter of law, right? And it varies from state to state. Parental rights are different from state to state, and some states don't have any parental rights to speak of. And the Fed doesn't actually say much of this other than certain case law that takes precedent or whatever. But there's no established like consistent standard of what parental rights are in all of this. So it gets very complicated in certain cases. In my case, for example, right, I believed I didn't understand. So when I went into family court, I didn't get this, that there was no right to. So in family court, if you are accused of action or inaction in any case, whatever it is, if you are accused of wrongdoing in the family court, there is actually a presumption of guilt. So they're going to take the accusation of the accusing party, and then you have the burden to disprove that accusation. And they never have to actually provide evidence for their claims. That's true at the family court in the state of California, in my experience. So just so y'all know, I mean, that's what I went through. So I went in there going, hey, you have to prove that I did this thing wrong. And they're like, no, you have to squash the accusation. It's not like a criminal court.
So forensic counseling services is run by 2 gay men. One of them is a fairly rational guy, kind of like him, nice guy. One of them, though, is a huge transgender activist. He refused to let me change my son out of address when my son came for the supervised visits. He refused to let me use my son's real name, his legal name, and he refused to let me pray with my sons.
Right. So all of that changing your son out of address, was it your son's choice? Misgendering your child, was that, in the best interest of your child? And then prayer, was that necessary at all? Your children don't want to pray. They don't subscribe to your Orthodox Christianity, and so these things were not allowed during the visit. And you're like, oh, well, I don't know what to tell you. If I can't, force my son to conform to a gender they don't identify with and pray to a God they don't believe in, then I don't know what I'm doing here.
Visits. And here's why he did that. Let me tell you again how family court works. He knew very well that my son would be embarrassed to be in a dress in front of me. And he would report that as fear, not embarrassment. And that would give the court more ammunition.
So it's this man himself creating the shame in his child. And once again, just that he doesn't get it. Doesn't get it. You are the problem.
Right? He knew that if I used James's real name, he would be forced to report that James was in boys' clothes using his boy's name, and he was perfectly comfortable with it with his father. And he didn't want to report.
No, he would be liable of you committing abuse and him being just an onlooker, a spectator on your abuse.
That. He wanted to report that James was uncomfortable as a boy, you see? So he could not let me be with James when he's just normal James. And finally, these psychologists have no theory. If you ask them in depositions, like, what is the empirical theoretical basis for the judgments you put in these reports, they fully admit that they don't have any.
Empirical theoretical basis? An empirical theoretical basis. Big words, sir. Big words. Pour a drink out to my bros who got cut and wonder what their skin is like. Tug, yeah. Pour one out for all the foreskins. Shit. I hate when it does that. You want to see the bottom half of this comment now. People demand their day in court, believing it's a court of biblical morals. And when they find out that it's a court of law, they scream and defame, belittle, and refuse to accept it. Yeah. Yeah, not all judges work like that. Some judges do. Some judges will be swayed by that, but not all or most judges. Christian Carpenter says, I've spent a bit of time in family court. It's not that different from criminal court in Tennessee anyway. Innocent until proven guilty is still the way the law works here. I had to prove my ex-wife unfit, not the other way around. It's the child's fault for shame and not you. Oh, my awesome wife. It's the child's fault for shame and not you. Yeah. So Christian Carpenter, I'm not going to say, I think it's the judge that holds more sway in any particular family court situation, right? Because you're not subject to a jury most of the time. There's special circumstances if there's a jury involved, I think. So as far as fitness, it can be easy to prove somebody unfit depending on their circumstances, right? Which is one thing. So then they can't have the child. But there's the extra step to say that they are a danger to the child, not just that they're unfit as a parent, but that the additional step says that they are in some way like a danger to the child. And that's kind of what I'm speaking of. Trying to get into too many of the specifics, but basically, I was accused of being a drug addict. And in my mind, I thought, well, I don't have any criminal charges, right? There's no evidence against me. It's just this person's word against mine, right? But if I didn't comply with certain conditions from the court, like random drug testing, then in their mind, I was guilty of that, even though there was an accusation with no evidence. And that was enough for them to consider that I might be a danger to my child, right? So it was the additional step of not just taking, the physical custody, but also restricting, prohibiting visitation in such a way and things like that. So
they say that they're just making observations about the child, but you're like, wait a minute, expert testimony requires a scientific basis. What's the scientific basis for this? And they admit they don't have it, but it's still admitted. Family courts will still admit this. So we got into it with him, and then I said, well, I can't do the supervised visits. So you see how they created another condition where I cannot comply with the order. You see how it works? Yeah. So now I'm not complying with a gag order, and now I'm not complying with supervised visitation. So they let this go for 18 months, which is a special benchmark in Texas, right? 18 months with no visitation. And then my ex-wife filed to move to California, saying that I had abandoned my sons because I wasn't visiting them. The judge said, well, Mr. Younger, we were perfectly allowed to go visit your sons. There was nothing stopping you from visiting your sons, and you just haven't done it.
Oh my God.
Sons. There was nothing stopping you from visiting your sons, and you just haven't done it. And I tell her, well, you know, I would morally miseducate my son. I would be directly harming my son by using his girl's name and teaching him that he's a girl when he's not. And you would be forcing me to pay $500 per visit, which is what it costs, per visit. So I'd be using my resources to hurt my son. And I've told this court repeatedly, those 3 things I'm never going to do. And she said, well, I conclude that you have abandoned your sons because you had every opportunity to go visit them. This is the game they play. So Judge Bloody Mary Brown's then allowed my ex-wife to move my kids to California since I had abandoned them in Texas. Not to mention that I write them letters all the time. You know, every time they go into a new school grade, you know, I ask them to tell me what they're studying. That I'm, you know, I have a Substack and I write letters to them online all the time. None of this stuff is even in the orders. It was not even allowed to be entered into evidence. It was all.
So basically, the guy just goes through this whole experience in denial of his child's, you know, trans identity and doesn't see the problem with that, and actually thinks, and by affirming that child's identity, he is doing more harm.
Said it was all hearsay.
So he's actually chosen to, you know, to take this path to be alienated from his child in this way. And rather than, you know, I mean, so it would be completely illogical to take it out on his kid, who's actually the trans person in this case, right? So instead he has to escalate it and be like, no, it's the mom's fault. It's the court's fault. It's not my fault. It's not my kid's fault. You know, it's the mom and the court doing all of this to us, right? Painting himself in the victim, portraying himself as the victim, as well as his child, who he is actually victimizing or attempting to victimize, right? The court is prohibiting him from doing that.
They keep out some evidence so that they can the judge can say, you know, on appeal, the judge say, well, this is the only facts I had available, you see. This is the game that gets played. If you want to know, you know, how the corruption in the Trump trials.
Well, in any court case, there's admissible evidence and there's inadmissible evidence. There's certain pieces of evidence they just say, no, we can't put that in here. It's not admissible for whatever reason that is, right? The court has its own standards for what is admissible in court, right? So that's not like, again, they're not targeting you. that's the way courts work. Yeah, court case.
Could happen. The template was from family court. It was family court lawyers that built the template for how to do this in criminal and civil courts. Family court was the template for it. It was developed, these strategies were developed by unscrupulous law firms in the late 80s and early 90s. And judges.
There's another conspiracy theory for you. It's the lawyers. The lawyers decided, I guess, you know, in the late 80s or early 90s, whatever.
Received most of their campaign donations from these law firms. And so the judges have kind of gone along with it. And now we've got, from the 90s to now, all the judicial training programs are run by those unscrupulous law firms. And so judges think this is just normal. You know, family court judges will just brag like, yeah, we violate people's constitutional rights all the time because we go with the best interest of the child. And they brag about violating parents' constitutional rights. And they hated me for making constitutional rights arguments, because the great fear of all family courts is that one day some father's going to make it into federal court. And they're going to have to rule that these gag orders are unconstitutional, that these supervised visitations are unconstitutional. Because honestly, if there hasn't been a criminal adjudication that a parent is unfit or unwilling to parent, then there's no basis for the court to interfere in the parent-child relationship. There is no 14th Amendment basis to do it. So the federal courts, I've been up to federal court many times trying to get in the federal court. I know many fathers do as well. There's an actual rule promulgated by the Supreme Court. And every Chief Justice since 1988 has reaffirmed the rule. And it just says we're not taking any cases out of family court. It's called the Domestic Relations Exception Rule. They just say we're not taking any cases out of family court. It doesn't matter if it implicates your constitutional rights. Doesn't matter if it violates the civil rights statutes. Doesn't matter. We're not taking anything out. any cases for family court. And so they all just get dismissed. They never get heard. And that's what's happened to me repeatedly.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
What has this done to you emotionally?
Well, what's the best way to describe that? So imagine you have children. And imagine, like me, you had children late in life. These are the only kids you're ever going to have. 2 boys, and you're really close with them. You're really, really close with them. To the point where they can almost read your mind, and you can almost read their mind. You know, it was something that my current wife would always remark on, that we would, all 3 of us, just get up and go do things, and we didn't talk about it. We all knew. Like, somehow we were just that close. So imagine you have kids that you're that close with, and you're put in a chair, and a judge brings your children into the room and initially threatens to sexually mutilate them, to castrate them, and begins to teach them all kinds of things that are completely against your ethical beliefs, totally against your ethical beliefs. And the children are punished harshly if they don't assent to these crazy things. And imagine eventually they chemically castrate your kids, and you got to sit there, and the judge and a police officer are watching you intently. And if at any time you show anger, or you stand up, or you gesture in a strong way, they're going to conclude that you are a domestic abuser.
So is he saying, wait, did he just say that children are punished harshly for not identifying as trans if people tell them they're trans? Does that ever happen? Has a child been punished for saying they're not trans? When did that happen?
And they're going to arrest you and put you in jail for domestic abuse. So you have to sit there and remain totally calm in the slow motion sexual abuse of your child. That's what's
sexual abuse. So yeah, I mean, that's just a strange way of looking at things, isn't it? So yeah, that's what we're dealing with here.
That's what it's been like for me.
It's horrifying.
I see the end result that's coming, and if I am too masculine in my...
Too what? SIE? I don't understand that comment.
Response, they're going to say, you're abusive, they tried so hard with my sons, the counselors, court-appointed counselors. They tried for years with my sons. They're like, isn't Mr. Younger an authoritarian parent? They ask leading questions like that of my sons. It's in the records. Isn't Mr. Younger an authoritarian? Doesn't he tell you what to do all the time? And of course, I'm just the opposite. My sons are like, no, Dad doesn't have any rules. They're like, what? No rules in the house? Like, I don't have rules, no. Dad just tells us to be reasonable with people. And if we're reasonable with people, we don't have to have rules.
All right. I don't believe that, but, and I don't think, like, if they asked a question like that, would you assume that they were leading it, or was it based on statements that the child had previously made? Oh, he deleted it. Oh, okay. I was like, what are we talking about here?
He did have to make one rule. I remember James saying, Dad did have to make one rule. We broke 2 iPads, so now we have to keep our iPads on tables. They can't be on the floor. But that's the only rule we have. And so they could never pin that on me. But that's another strategy, is they weaponize masculinity, right? So I had to reach.
But you don't need rules, right? Like if the consequence of shame is present, right? Like the whole thing with the child not wanting to wear a dress in front of you, right? It's not because it's not allowed, right? They're allowed to wear the dress, but they know that you will make them feel ashamed or embarrassed or strange if they do that, right? So you create an environment where it is uncomfortable for them to present the way they want to present.
Teach myself how to talk in court. I talk like a woman in court. I literally got female attorneys and emulated them, learned how to talk like them.
Welcome to Take 5 Oil Change.
How long does this take?
Give us 10 minutes, we'll get you on your way.
10 minutes? Get out.
Emulated them, learned how to talk like them.
Yeah, you just learn to talk like a woman, man. That's how you do it.
Because the masculine way that a boxer like me relates to another boxer, you're not only going to lose your kids, they're going to put you under a domestic violence restraining order. and you're going to lose your passport. You're going to lose your licensure in the state. If you're a stockbroker, you're going to lose your license.
Did you challenge your child to a boxing match? Is that how you resolve this issue?
You can't possess a firearm, lifetime. You can't possess a firearm. They're going to do that to you if you're too masculine. So I had to retrain all that. So not only imagine
if you're too masculine, they're going. So he's like, yeah, that's the problem. Like people, who are guilty of domestic abuse, they're just too masculine for society, man. Like they're just too manly for these woke leftists or whatever, right? Like that's the problem.
You're watching your kid being sexually abused, but now you got to start acting like a woman and be very passive because it could.
Because women are just always generally passive. Like, it's not sexist at all.
Much worse for your kid, actually. They could remove you in such a way that they could give you a lifetime restraining order and you could never contact your kids again for the rest of their lives.
So there's a chance you might be going to prison for this, right?
Your kid could get that restraining order as well, yeah.
Yeah, I could tell you that I'm definitely going to be going to prison because the current position of the law is that I have to pay for the chemical and physical castration of my son as medical child support. And I told you the 3 principles. We've gone through that. I'm never going to hurt my son. I'm not going to let my resources be used to hurt my son. So I'm just not going to pay that child support. I'm not doing it. And eventually, I'll be prosecuted for it. And in California, I can get up to 2 years in slammer. So that's the kind of pressure and emotional boiler is the way I would.
Yeah, and they don't do that to just anybody, right? Like they don't invest resources in just prosecuting every dude who can't pay his child support for whatever reason. Like if you have the means to do so, and if they paying that support, that's when they're going to come after you and they're going to hit you hard.
Describe it that you're under. It's pretty intense, and when I'm arguing in court, and I gave up using lawyers years ago because the bar is a cartel, and members of the bar.
The bar is a cartel. He hates the law. He hates lawyers. He hates judges. He hates the whole legal system. I mean, because they're all out to get him. They're all against him, man. Why wouldn't you, right? Of course you would.
We're never going to challenge judges on these fundamental rights issues. That's why one of the reasons we never get really rights issues heard is lawyers won't make them. They won't make them to judges because it's challenging the judge.
How do you bring it down? He's like, oh, no, I believe in the Constitution, not the rule of law. My constitutional rights, all I need, like he doesn't, there's just like this loose, he doesn't understand the association from one to the other, right? How, like how laws are made at all. Like he just doesn't get it. Gave up using lawyers. Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing too. Like lawyers, doctors, they're totally human beings and they're subject to their own biases and, shortcomings, like they may have all this training in a specific field, right? But it doesn't make them immune to being human.
So I went pro se a long time ago, and I've been much more effective pro se. But I have to sit there and
so you're representing yourself?
Oh yeah, I've been doing that for 7 years. Yeah. And I've beat some of the top law firms in America. I mean, I don't think it's that hard to be pro se. The biggest problem you have as pro se is the judges are supposed to give you more leeway as pro se. Like, if you make a mistake, they're supposed to say, hey, did you mean to do this, or can we do it this way? They're allowed to do that with pro se. They're not allowed to do that with a bar attorney. But in practice, what actually happens is they never tell you your mistakes. In fact, they try to trick you. And family court judges in particular are notorious for getting parents to voluntarily waive all of their constitutional rights. So I'll give you an example of that in Texas. So judge entered this order for supervised visitation and all this, and she very politely says, Mr. Younger, I really think we can, if you go to these supervised visits, we can get this order removed and all this stuff, and it's all lies. Judges are just actors. And she says, so are you prepared to sign the order now? And I said, well, Judge, I'm not going to sign the order. And she said, Mr. Younger, this is a court of law, and this is an order from the court. And I said, well, then you need to sign it. It's your order. What she's trying to trick me into doing was signing approval of the order. Now I can't appeal it, and I've voluntarily given her jurisdiction over all the matters listed. Okay, that's one of the tricks they do.
That's not true. You can always appeal any order. It doesn't matter if you sign it. You can sign it under contempt of the court, like you can, or under duress, right? So signing the order acknowledges that the court has made this ruling, and you're acknowledging receipt of the ruling. Doesn't mean that you agree with the ruling. That's not what it means.
So she said, well, I mean, I don't know what to do. I'm gonna have to have another hearing. I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll agree that it has the form of a judicial order. I'll agree to the form of the order, but I don't agree to any of the content. So I sent us the form, but not the content. And
That's literally all you were doing in the first place.
she was forced to just put it out there without my signature. Most parents will sign those documents. Most lawyers who are representing parents will sign the document. And if your lawyer signs the document, you assented to it. So actually, most of the things that happen in family court that violate parents' rights, parents are tricked into giving up their rights. And I never did that, and that's what drove them crazy. And that's why they eventually had to let my son move out of Texas.
What a nightmare for you.
Yeah.
No, that's not entirely untrue in my experience. Once again, and this is so through the family court. I remember there being a point in time where the judge generated this order, and they said, well, all you have to do is agree to the guardianship in this case, right? Guardianship goes to this other party. And then consent to X, Y, and Z, right? These other conditions. And, basically it was painted as, this is what you can do to please the court. And in my mind, once again, I kind of took this dude's tactic and on a different lane, but said, well, wait, like, why would I agree to give the guardianship to this person, and also accept these conditions, right? You're going to give them guardianship anyway, so I don't need to agree to that, right? And I'm challenging the validity of these conditions you're placing on it. So, no, I'm not going to, under this circumstance, I'm just going to say that obviously you're going to override me anyway, so I'm not going to agree to this. And it is true that by doing that, I would have been voluntarily relinquishing not parental rights, right, but legal guardianship at that time, which I was not willing to do, which didn't matter because the kids weren't even in my possession, right? So at this point, I'm challenging the conditions the court has placed upon me and come in to retain my guardianship, right, which it was already in place. So even without physical possession of the kids, as a matter of legal standing, right, I never relinquished guardianship. It was still subsequently taken from me, but I chose not to relinquish it. So if that's what you mean by parental rights, again, there's different complexities in the state law for different places and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
Did James show any signs of wanting to be a female around you?
Never. In fact, I had a dress at home in his closet. And I taught him mathematics through woodworking and stuff, so we built their beds and everything, and so they had their own room, and the furniture was all custom, stuff. And they had this, they tricked out the closet with how they hang their stuff up and all that.
all very, very manly. We were doing woodworking. We built our own beds. Yeah.
And he had a dress in there. And I said, look, if you want to experiment wearing a dress, you can do that here in the house. It's not a problem. You can do it anytime you want. A few weeks go by, and I hear this noise. I get up. I have a bed. My master bedroom's on the downstairs floor. I get up, and James is going back up. The light goes off, and he threw the dress away in the middle of the night when he thought I wasn't looking.
And once again, you can just imagine the scenario where he's probably not telling the whole story here. If the kid wants to identify or wear a dress in like any other given social situation except around their father, then once again, that might be an issue with you that you're not looking at there.
I never saw any of these things. And even when I would go to, and I have tons of video of this, I'll go to pick my son up for my visitation periods from my ex-wife's house. He comes out of her house in boys' clothes.
Keep watching if your recent car accident was not your fault, because I've got a way that you could get.
I mean, you could argue that he's doing that just to please his dad.
Yeah, definitely. But what it shows is
Yeah. See, and then he just says it like right there. It's just, hello. This dude is in such deep denial. Yeah, that's right. My awesome life. It could be the attention. Kids love that shit. Yeah, and that was problematic. Early on, you are led to believe, at least based on this guy's story, that the kid is acting trans to please the mother, right? Which would also be sick, right? But now, the deeper you get, when you start to use logic, right, and it tells you that actually this kid enjoys identifying being trans everywhere except for around this guy, right? It seems that seems to be the evidence that we have. So
Comfortable in boys' clothes at his mom's house and his dad's
Do
house.
you think the mom kind of brainwashed him into?
no, he could have just changed the child could have changed clothing just before coming out of the house just to be around you, right?
Thinking this was something that was.
There's no question in my mind about it. Yeah, 100%.
Just like the
yeah.
child was changing clothing as soon as they got to school after leaving your house, right, or your vehicle or whatever. So the common thing is they only prefer to look like a boy when they're with the dad.
When I told you, when I asked him that question, why did you do this? And he says, Mommy doesn't love me if I'm not a girl. That's why he did it. That's why he did it, you know. And you know, I have had a lot of so-called.
Now, if that's actually the way that child feels, I don't know. I think that if that was true, I'm not saying it is, but if it were true, right, that would be pretty disturbing. It would tell you that this person is only being trans to please one of their parents, which seems highly improbable. I don't think that would happen. If it were true, it would be disgusting, right? It would be a very, very troubling. But again, logic tells us that this probably is not true.
Gender experts, you know, because I've had just in my California trial recently, I know they put an expert on the stand that I destroyed a top transgender doctor from Children's Hospital here. Destroyed this woman. And so I talk to them all the time, and they say, well, gender is innate and immutable. It's something that you're born with. It's innate and immutable. And so I just go, well, if it's innate and immutable, then how could there possibly be detransitioners? How could that even be possible? They'll say things like, people know their gender identity from an early age. How is that when there's no sexual identity that you have until you go through puberty, early stages of puberty? How is that possible?
Well, sexual identity and gender identity can be very distinctive, different things, and they develop at different periods in your life. So gender identity, for example, according to people, right, can be very early on in life. You can begin to establish gender identity. You wouldn't necessarily establish sexual preferences unless you were, abused in some way or like exposed to sexuality. Otherwise, that generally doesn't come up at a very early age. It's pretty unusual, right? That comes along later on with the puberty stage and all of that, adolescence.
Like it contravenes everything we know about child development from before. So in this regard, I'm somewhat different than a lot of the people that oppose this child transgender stuff. I think actually you learn to be a man and a woman. I think there's a set of potentialities.
So the other Christians are like, you're either born a man or you're born a woman. You can't transition. But this guy's like, no, you learn to be a man or a woman through development. It's all just very like, what? Pick a lane, man. Pick a fucking lane. Sure. Well, it's good to see your recent history, the last 5 to 6 years, should more than prove you're capable of being an awesome dad, Captain. Thank you. I know I am. It's just anyway. My situation is fucked, but I'm not going to sit here and be like this guy because that's not helpful to anybody. My Awesome Life says, I saw a similar family dynamic on the Dr. Phil show. Uh-oh. Disconnected Bluetooth for a minute. Okay, we're back. I saw a similar family dynamic on the Dr. Phil show, and I was shocked to see Dr. Phil actually explain the child's point and ask the father to accept it. Holy crap. That is crazy. Really good episode.
Like a male child is going to have higher testosterone levels, and there are different potential behaviors from a child that has less testosterone, like a female child. But basically, you learn to be a man mainly from other men. And this used to not be very controversial, So,
and that's basically, in a nutshell, like he doesn't realize it, but he's defeating his own point there. If you learn how to be a man from other men, and all other men ever teach you is that, men, work with wood and do boxing, and that art is feminine, and that's what you learn from men, right? Then that's just a standard implemented, it's not actually, a fact, a matter of fact, right? It's a societal norm that you wish to uphold, that men should be a certain way, and you think that other men should tell men who are becoming men how they should be. And that just, I think it's just self-defeating.
If you look at the whole history of child rearing in the Western world, and even I know quite a bit about the Eastern world, it's very similar there. Children.
Gio says guardianship can be given to a person to make decisions in best interest of the child. It's a legal guardian, not physical guardian, and can help to limit bias from parents in legal decisions. Yeah. So there's, well, I mean, it's, again, varies from state to state, but here we have, you have the legal custody and guardianship, and then the physical custody and guardianship. So one could have physical custody of a child go to one parent, but the joint legal custody between both parents, so that you can't make any major like medical decisions or things like that without both parents consenting. But the one parent could have the sole physical responsibility of the child, with the other parent maybe or maybe not having visitation. So it's all kind of complicated in that way. Yeah, and that's why, parental rights as such, the way this guy is trying to paint it, or the way a lot of Americans believe they have parental rights, don't actually exist as a matter of law unless you establish custody and guardianship, et cetera, et cetera. It's all very complicated. And, I think most people within the family court system, if it's not really necessary, would advise people not to get involved in the system, right? If you can possibly work things out amongst yourselves without using family courts, that's your best option, because the family courts are not very good.
Typically were raised by their mothers until they were 9 to 12. And that's actually the origin of why Italians were kind of considered mama's boys, because they stayed in the home till they were 12. When Germans, left their mother's home at 9, so they're like, well, look at those Italians, they stay with their moms, But basically, men raised older children who were boys, and women raised young children and girls. That's how the world has worked forever, right? You learn to be a man from other men, and it's not innate. And I think the prison studies show this on even sexuality, I think. Sexuality is fluid. Like, these things are not like identities. And that's really, if I had to put my finger.
So now you're like, so sexuality is fluid. So these things are not identities. So being a straight, cis white man, in your opinion, is not actually a valid identity, according to what you just said.
On like where this crazy stuff came from is there was in the middle.
I don't even think he understands what he's saying. Sherwood says, my sons learn to be men without having a steady male role model. Well, there's some argument to be made that then they're just learning from other men around the community, right? Like me, my dad wasn't very involved when I was a kid. I learned from various other people, other people's parents. I learned from my mom's boyfriends, and I got different examples of how men might act, and they varied widely, right? Like, there wasn't a consistent model, which is like the ideal nuclear family unit or whatever. It's like you have this one man who's in the house, he's there every day, and he portrays a consistent example of how to act to the children, right? But that's not the only way that people exist. It's not even probably like the majority of people that actually experience that. And in homes where you do have that consistent role model, how consistent are they in reality? Like, how many people are truly that consistent in their day-to-day activities to where they don't come home after having like a bad day at work and, maybe blow off some steam or whatever. So I think they try to paint this picture of like this simple family unit, like this Leave It to Beaver household that never existed in reality. It's an archetype, right? And it's one might call it mythology, It's a mythos of like this perfect American family that never in fact existed. My awesome life. Ape's been helping me with my 4 boys for some time now. He's the best father figure they've ever had. I love you too. Thank you.
Part of the 20th century, but it started before that. It goes back to the late 1800s. There was a radical redefinition of the human person. So what's happening in America is not really a conflict over transgender rights or left versus right or social construction theories in psychology versus innate views of the innate person. It's not that. That's not what's happening. What's happening is we have two large groups in America that just don't agree on what a human person is. And so when I say he's my child, that word child, they don't mean the same thing when they say child. And let me give you an example of this. So there's a really good book by a guy named Truman. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Expressive Self, which chronicles this change. And, if you were to ask my grandfather, he was a farmer, and he literally could outwork. 2 weeks before he died, he literally outworked me on the farm. He could literally outwork me to the day he died. Tough guy. And if you were to ask him, does farming fulfill you? Are you self-fulfilled as a farmer? You probably would have spent 4 hours trying to explain the question, because those categories don't go together. Farming was a way he raised his kids and sent his kids to school. And he did the hard physical labor, and now his kids can do white-collar labor. He did that by farming. It wasn't something he liked to do. It didn't even occur to him that whether he would like it or not. He just had to do it, right? But you can see, it's pretty easy for people to see there's been a different change in the way we think about work. People can see that. It's harder to see how this idea of the person changed, but you can see it very clearly.
Yeah, it's like this old school machismo, and there's also the old style of control, like the caste system is embedded in there as well, where you'd say, there's people who still retain names, like from, historical names that meant, right, like your name literally entailed your occupation. Like people who worked with wood, people who, whatever the given thing was, right? You got people, their names pertain to what their families did historically. And if you were your father's son, your father was a farmer, you were going to be a farmer because that was just the way things were. And this is just like old-timey way of thinking about things. So yeah, you get your identity as a farmer, which you retain from your father, which is completely irrelevant now. Like, we don't need this shit. Like, we don't even do this anymore. And this is probably why there's this social phenomenon of people actually finding out who the fuck they are, right? Because they don't solely identify with who their parents were, what their parents did, right? They want to make their own identities. There's whatever, like American rugged individualism or something, where these people just come out of obscurity and build empires. Again, another form of mythology, right? But is one that we base our existential position on. Is this mythology that it doesn't matter if your dad was a potato farmer in Ireland or whatever, right? You come to America, you have an equal opportunity and equal footing with everybody else to create your own identity and do your own thing. And that's like the American archetype. And that's apparently problematic for these guys. I don't know.
With sexual identity. So you ask a Christian like me about sexual identity, and I'm going to say, I don't even know what that is. Sexuality is a behavior.
If this fire is a fentanyl overdose, naloxone is the extinguisher that stops it cold.
Say, I don't even know what that is. Sexuality is a behavior.
Sexuality is a behavior. It's a preference that can influence behaviors or not. It can be repressed. Smith equals blacksmith? Yeah, exactly, sure. You can reprove. Soft white, what? Translation, some people just don't celebrate trans activity. No, we don't, and we'll never. We love all people, however, we're Christians. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's essentially this guy's argument. He's like, I'm a Christian, I don't want my kids to be like not Christian. But, is that the correct position to take? But yeah, I mean, generally, this man is blaming everybody else for his kid's transness, not accepting his kid's transness, and therefore has no involvement in his kid's life because he chooses not to accept his kid as trans. But he doesn't blame the kid. He blames the system, he blames the courts, he blames the mom, but he doesn't blame himself, he doesn't blame the kid.
And you're in control of your behaviors. So I don't know what you mean by an identity.
Why doesn't he blame God, though?
Sexual identity. It doesn't even make to me. It doesn't even make sense, right? And to a large portion of America, it doesn't make sense, right? So when people talk about sexuality, they're really not talking about the same thing. Then on the other side, if I steel man the other side will say, well, no, sexuality is innate and immutable, and who you're attracted to is innate and immutable. So it's a status, not a behavior. And we don't agree on that in this country, right? Similarly with transgenderism, this idea of a gender identity. Well, I think of gender identity as something you learn, behaviors and duties that you learn from your father and you carry on to your children, and it has to be taught. If it has to be taught, how could it be innate and immutable? How could the gender expression of males be different across cultures if it was innate, biologically innate? That doesn't even make sense, right? To me.
The thing is that there's, language is evolving, right? So as we learn new things about the human condition, psychology, right, we invent new language to describe the thing that we're feeling internally and express that to other people. And so there are people who were like born before a certain time when they weren't able to articulate what gender dysphoria was or what, the objective is in that situation, right? You just say that I feel like a woman, but the only thing you could do was, maybe change your mode of dress or the way you did your hair or something, right? Whereas now you can do medical interventions to actually change those physical characteristics and those expressions. Because we're capable of doing that, there is now new language to express the thing that has always existed, right? So it was just a matter of science and technology catching up to where there was a way to describe this scientifically and then change our terminology around it, right? Yeah.
Now, let's steel man the other side, and here's what I think goes on in the mind of these people that want to transition their kids, especially boys. They go, well, here's this child, and I believe that sexual identity is the center point of human identity. It's the starting point of almost all aspects of human identity. And I've had a lot of people who are on the right with me who say, why would anyone believe that? And I'm like, well, imagine you have a view that's completely conditioned by the theory of evolution, for example. The theory of evolution is the theory of sexual selection. So your sexuality is the primary mover of all human progress. And
that's not true. Sexuality is one aspect of evolution. It's not the whole of evolutionary theory, and by any means.
It makes perfect sense, actually, when you think about it like that. So sexuality is this center pivot point at which all other parts of your identity
No, I wouldn't say it's the center pivot point at all.
move around. So now you look at a child who maybe is struggling in school or something.
This is a bad steel man. Sure says sex is not a behavior. Well, it can be, right? It's expressed as behavior, but sexuality does not necessarily reflect in the behavior in all cases. Or, that's why you have dudes who were gay for many years, knew they were gay, but continued to persist in a heterosexual relationship that was not fulfilling for them, right? Because they are repressing the fact that they're gay. So we can't actually trust people's behavior to accurately reflect their true motivations. The sheriff says, yeah, he said sex was a behavior, and then he said it wasn't. Yeah, he's flip-flopped a lot. He's conflating sexual preference with gender identity, which are two different things. He's all over the place. Rebuke and Reproof says, not involved equals won't attend their gay wedding. Yeah. I mean, in his case, this guy has no choice. He cannot attend the wedding if there is one because his child has chosen to, basically disassociate from him based on his views and actions here. So, even though his claim is that he wants to do what is morally right in his opinion to protect his child, he has no association with this child because he has done so much harm through these activities. And he doesn't seem to understand that. He still feels like he's a victim. So, right? If you just refrain from, and it's okay, misgendering, dead naming, and shaming your child, right? But instead you persisted in all those activities and you doubled down at every turn. And so now you have no affiliation with your child and you can just go bitch on podcasts and you might do a prison sentence because you won't pay your child support. And apparently that is all very Christian. Sure, Wilkes says gender is based on X or Y chromosomes. No, those X and Y chromosome. That's the biological sex. So based on the alignment of the chromosomes, I'm kind of like paraphrasing here, but based on the alignment of the chromosomes, you may have the biological characteristics of a male or female, right? But it's not the same in every case. So you can have like mixed pairs or whatever, like transsexual people, where they have both parts and stuff like that. So it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And so gender expression, or gender as a social construct, says that regardless of whatever biological, substrate I'm born under with these chromosomes or whatever, right, that the way I feel internally takes precedent over that. And in order for me to express my true identity, what I have to do is change my external appearance, or whatever, right, in order to present as a gender other than the one that I was cast into because I was born, male or female. So it just basically says that I get to choose how I present regardless of how I was born, which is essentially true for anybody. And I guess, like there's this other question of like, if people want to get other types of like aesthetic surgeries, cosmetic surgeries or whatever, is that legitimate, right? If you don't like your nose or something like that, is that analogous to having a sex change? And I would say it is, right? Like, I don't think there's anything different from, getting a rhinoplasty versus, ethically speaking, than having a medical procedure for sex change, right? But I think the implications for the individual are going to be much bigger, right? I think there's probably less stigma for the person who's getting the rhinoplasty as opposed to the person who's being gender reassigned, right? So they have to look at the social stigma and the way that they want to be perceived by other people and how they will in reality be perceived by other people. And that's kind of the problem, because if you go through the whole deal of having the operation of doing the hormones and then people still deny your identity, well, then has that actually fixed the problem? Or can you internalize that to be okay with yourself, regardless of the fact that other people are still going to be critical of you? Sherbrooke says mentally gender can be who you identify. Rebuke and reprove is make up your mind. Is this identity or a behavior? So is a behavior reflective of the identity, right? If you identify a certain way and you were serious about it, then necessarily that would map out onto, so I think if you see a person who says I identify as a woman, but they, wear a beard or something, then there's probably something not right about that, because most women wouldn't choose to wear a beard, right? That's not typically feminine.
And you go, well, this child has no sexual identity. They're prepubescent. Sexual identity doesn't develop until the early part of puberty. So when they look at a child, they see a child with no identity because there's no sexual identity. So they give the child one. They give the child a sexual identity by which they can express themselves. And they use that language. When you listen to them, this is the language they use. I want to give my child an identity so they can express themselves and experiment with who they really are. This is the language that they use. The idea of experimenting with your identity. And you see that contradicts innate and immutable too. That doesn't work either. But that's the strongest way I can show this change in human thinking about it. Even on sexuality and gender, half the country thinks it's a behavior, and half the country thinks it's an innate and immutable biological trait. And so there's no way for us to have a rational discussion about this unless we understand how we're using the same words for different concepts. So we're talking past one another. And when I'm in court, I'm very adept at explaining that to judges and showing that what these transgender doctors are saying is incoherent with our entire knowledge of child development in the past. So the transgender issue isn't really just it's not just some child policy issue or some crazy liberals, as law conservatives. It's just crazy liberals and all. It's not that. It's much more fundamental than that. We have become so decadent, and I don't mean like debauched. I mean in the Latin sense, decadenced. We have become so out of step with one another that we don't even agree on what a human person is, and we can't raise our children the same way. And that's how bad it's become. And I think the future is going to look, and I recognize it's going to go on YouTube, so I have to be careful how I say this. The future is going to look something like this. If we're going to stay together and we're going to pursue a national identity together, these two groups that don't agree on fundamental things, they don't agree on the good life, they don't agree even on what a human person is, we're probably going to have to go back to a radical federalist idea in this country, where we just go, okay, California is going to chemically castrate kids, and in Texas, you'll get the death penalty for it. And we're just going to have to accept that.
Which is like where we're at right now on abortion, right? Like in some places you'll get tried as a murderer, and other places we're like, come over here.
California and Texas just we don't have to live the same kind of lives. But the transgender issue is the fissure point. It's the issue which defines all of the other differences.
Reduces, he's assigning his kid an identity and then saying since they don't follow that identity, they are being given it. Yeah, exactly. They've been coerced, they've been forced, they've been manipulated. Apparently, there are severe, harsh punishments for children who do not identify with as trans. Like if people tell them they're trans, then they've got to do it, otherwise they'll be punished. That was his claim earlier. He just with no substantiation at all, but that was his claim. My awesome wife, the damage she has done to his son's mental health is morally wrong, though. Yeah. And that's why the child, who sounds like is a trans woman, actually, has chosen to dissociate from him. And, of course, the courts are not going to, they're going to let that child make that decision. Sherlock says a child's personality develops by the age of 5. Yeah, that's early development. And then there's further development, right? They say, like, our brains aren't fully developed until we're like 25, right? So even after you're an adult, you're still not fully developed. And then arguably, like the whole process of life, you're still hopefully constantly developing. But you are rooted in an identity, right? Around age 5, and then you reach the age of reason, which is like 8, and then puberty. Puberty sets on shortly after what we call the age of reason, where you presumably have the ability to like distinguish what's right from what's wrong, and you're making conscious decisions to what you're doing, right? That's kind of the way we break it down. And it's all very generalized, like not like everybody develops at a different pace, but generally this is kind of like, a roundabout age that these things go on. So, so all of, your teenagers are like experimental, right? Because you have a new set of things going on. You have established identity, you have critical thinking, now you're out in complex social situations and having hormonal desires all at the same time, right? And so you're off experimenting in the world because you have no prior knowledge for this. You just have whatever training you've gotten so far, and then you're kind of thrust into it.
It's the one that shows most clearly because people either assent to it or they don't, and there's no in between. So it's a bellwether issue for the country, and we should pay close attention to it, I think, because of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wish you had a professional business address and phone number instead of your home address and personal number?
And we should pay close attention to it, I think, because of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So your sons are how old now?
They're 12, almost 13.
And has James done any hormone therapy or any kind of?
So she doesn't have to notify me, but she filed in court in California to put him on puberty.
So now he's still dead naming his kid, but actually properly identifying the gender now, at this point in the story.
blockers. So I'm pretty sure he's on puberty blockers. And I should probably
But he's fluid with the gender there, I guess. It was a she, it was a he, I'm not sure.
how he got to California.
But he knows full well that his biological male son is transitioning to be a woman. He knows this. He's just refusing to use the language consistently.
So Judge Bloody Mary Brown, 301st District Court, Dallas, Texas, issues this order which allows her to move my son to California. I actually seek emergency mandamus relief from the Texas Supreme Court. And I went up there with Justice Young and Justice Blacklock, who were leading the court's analysis of my case. Justice Blacklock, rather absurdly, and this is under the influence of the donors, said that my son was no more likely to be chemically castrated in California than in Texas, which is just the stupidest thing you could ever say. It's illegal in Texas and it's required in California. It's a required medical treatment.
That's not true. Like it's required in California. See, these are the things that people. It's not required. What it's said in the law is that you can't refuse like a necessary treatment, right? If there's, right, like if one doctor says, I work with this patient, I find this treatment to be medically necessary, the other doctor has to have a legitimate reason to refuse the treatment, right? Like a scientific medical reasoning, not, oh, that makes me feel weird or that makes me feel gross, right? Doctors can't use that language. You can, but doctors can't do it because that puts their practice at risk. Reggio says, I think he's talking about mother when he's saying, since it consisted of court filings. Well, yeah, essentially what he's saying is because, the mom is a pediatrician, so she has sway with the courts and within the medical community. So she has this leverage of being a medical provider herself is kind of the deal here. So essentially the courts just do whatever she wants because she's a pediatrician, according to him, right? But that's not really the way it works. I mean, sure, you're going to have a bit more sway, right? Like if you're actually a doctor and you're talking about medical stuff and this guy's just like, well, I'm a Christian. I'm just some random Christian dude, but let me, argue against your medical practice or whatever. So yeah, it definitely seems like, we're getting his version of the story, which obviously he needs to believe it, but that's not necessarily the truth.
In California, that 12-year-olds can consent to, by the way, in California. So he made that up. And about 6 months after he issued that ruling, the governor of Texas promoted him to Chief Justice. And what happened was I created so much mayhem in Texas to get that law passed and outlawing this stuff in Texas that the Republicans in Texas said, we just want this case to move out of the state so it's not a political problem anymore. They wanted it to move to California. And so, and that's what they're telling all the constituents now. Well, that Jeff Younger case is in California, it's not in Texas, there's nothing we can do about it anymore. Yeah. That's how the world really works. The world, we think of the courts as these august institutions with men who, study old books and they apply, common sense and wisdom, and that's not. No, it's highly political. Everything that goes to the courts is highly political. So, it's my intention to go after Justice Blacklock, Chief Justice Blacklock in the Supreme Court, and remove him from office. And I'll be working very hard to do that over the next 5 years.
What does this mean for you legally? Are there repercussions for you?
Yeah. So what happened was the case got moved to LA County.
See, and the thing you're not realizing is that the court in that case is limited in the scope of power, right? How do they prevent that person from relocating, right? What is the precedent for that? They can't. They have no reason to do so, right? It's just you saying, I don't like it. Well, that's not a fucking legal reason to prevent them from moving. And
I wind up in Department 63 under Judge Mark Uhas. And right from the very beginning, some very strange things happened in this case. So I had a federal case going on. And it was just to seek declaratory relief to relieve me of the unconstitutional gag order. There was a mistake made. You know the MoFo law firm? Morris Forster? They are the most powerful law firm in California. They represent Google, Facebook.
MoFo, that's a great name.
All those people. That's the law firm I was facing. Their retainers are astronomical. So I've always known that my wife was getting help from somewhere, but because it's so much money, like how can she afford the retainers on the lawyers in Texas? The law firm is Coons Fuller. Their minimum retainer is $175,000 minimum.
These people are probably taking these cases like pro bono or at cost or whatever.
And they triple that going to trial. Like, so she's spending $500,000 every time she sues me, and she sued me over and I've been in a continuous lawsuit for 11 years. So imagine, she spent millions of dollars. Where's this money coming from? Well, I learned this in the federal lawsuit. Once I had moved to California, I filed in the Central District with the federal court to get rid of this gag order. And the MoFo lawyer, MoFo is Morse for, so that's actually their website, mofo.com. So sends an email, and I think there were a number of lawyers copied in this email. I think those lawyers should have been in the BCC field, the blind copy field, but they were in the CC field, and I think it was a mistake. And they were lawyers from nonprofit NGOs that are funded by USAID and George Soros.
It's a big match for the National Women's Soccer League, and only the best will win.
And George
That's
Soros.
just such a lofty claim. USAID and...
Let me now explain a little bit of the background about how Republicans actually started the transgender movement. So the largest donor to the Republican Party today is a guy named Paul Singer. And Paul Singer founded the Human Rights Campaign. You know the yellow equal sign? Yeah, a Republican founded that, not a Democrat. And he also runs the Manhattan Institute, completely funds it, which is a prominent conservative think tank. He funds the Claremont Institute and is a substantial donor to the Heritage Foundation. So he has a lot of say over what these people do. He's deeply committed to the transgender issue and funded lawsuits for it all over the country, created the framework for corporations to the scoring system for gay and transgender people that are used for investments, you know, like Vanguard and all these big investment things where they're going to invest in, buy your stock or not. He invented all that stuff. So he's the largest donor to the Republican Party. He's the largest out-of-state donor to politicians in Texas. So
Sherlock says, when my daughter was a teenager, she told me that the greatest thing I instilled in her was to accept people for who they are, keep an open mind, and follow your heart. Yeah. You know, those are basically things that my mom taught me as a kid. And I always appreciated her for that. She didn't instill any beliefs in me beyond, you know, to be kind and accepting of other people. And yeah, like when I asked her about religion, she said, "Here, make up your own mind," and she like gave me a bunch of books. You know, she didn't tell me what to believe, but just be kind, be accepting, be tolerant.
that's what I'm actually fighting here. That's what I've actually been fighting. Billionaire hedge fund guys that want leftist social policies. So I'm in this California court, and I find this. I'm like, I see these lawyers and these foundations. And I'm like, oh, that's what's really happening. So then my antenna is up. In California, it's weird. In family court, you get 3 judges in a California family court. You get a supervising judge, which was Judge Kalf.
So I had to do some research on this because I hadn't heard about this, but this is actually in an appeals court. So this isn't typical for all California family courts. It's a specific type of hearing that he's talking about with the 3-judge system.
In LA County. You get a home court judge, which was Judge Kazadi, and then you get a trial judge. And it allows you to kind of almost have like a little appeal for things. If something doesn't go quite right, you can go back up to the supervising judge, have a look at it, right? So right off the bat, we meet with home court judge, Judge Kazadi. She's completely taken my side. She's like, why can't this man see his kids? There's no reason he can't see his kids. There's no domestic violence. There's no even allegations of abuse. It's never occurred. Like, why can't he see his kids? Opposing counsel starts texting. Then the judge picks up her phone and reads a text. And she says, we're going to take a 30-minute recess. She walks out of the courtroom. Even the court reporter was like, what? What happened? She comes in after 30 minutes and says nothing other than the following. This case is sealed. And walks out. The clerks at the LA County courthouse completely deleted all my records.
I have something similar in my case, not the same, but similar, where they said basically there was an evidentiary matter, a matter of record, right? And when the judge was initially taking my side in my proceeding and then proceeded to look at a sealed document, which I could not review, you know, but it was an affidavit signed by a witness, right? And based on that affidavit signed by that witness, which I wasn't allowed to review or know anything about, other than that there was a witness who had signed an affidavit. That's all I knew. Based on that, it changed the whole nature of the proceedings, right? Based on a sealed signed testimony that cannot be refuted. It's not, the person doesn't have to appear in court, they won't be cross-examined, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a weird, thing they do in the courts in California that makes it almost impossible to cross-examine a certain piece of evidence or testimony.
My lawyer could not access them. I could not access them. Nobody could access them. Except, interestingly, opposing counsel, the one who sent the text, could still access them. So that's the first thing weird that happened. My entire record was deleted. They have a way of keeping it offline so you can only get paper copies. They have a way of protecting the paper copies. We have to get permission from a judge. They didn't do that. They actually deleted it. So that happens.
I don't believe that's what happened. I mean, he's saying that's what happened, but that's not in fact what happened.
Then,
if they deleted it, the other party wouldn't have it. You just don't have access to it because it's sealed.
they collapse all three of those judicial functions into one judge, Mark Uhas, who's my trial court judge. So now he's the supervising judge, the home court judge, and the trial judge.
Airwick Essential Mist Diffusers perfectly portable, quick change fragrances make any space fragrant and inviting.
Artless AI voiceover feature allows you to turn your words into voices you never thought.
Yeah, see, I don't think he fully understands the nature of it. It sounds like when he started out, he was in an appeals court and they said, oh, we can't do anything with this, right, because it's sealed from another jurisdiction, is kind of what it sounds like. And so then he goes back to the standard model family court after that.
He rules that the records are sealed, the case is sealed, and no one may enter the courtroom except me, the lawyers, and expert witnesses. So the public was denied the right to view the trial.
That's usually the way it works in California family court. So he had taken it to another level. They decided that it wasn't appropriate in that venue. They put it back to what you would tend to see in the California family courts.
That's what they did to me in there. And this is really important, and the judge probably had to do this to prevent himself from being prosecuted. So there's a whole network of court watchers in family court, and here's what we found. Some of them will secretly record. They're not supposed to, but they'll secretly record the proceedings. Then we get the court reporter's record, and it doesn't match the audio recording. And it happens all the time. Happens all the time. The judges are instructing the court reporters to alter the record to prevent an appeal. And a lot of times these judges are committing felonies on the bench by violating criminal statutes.
I don't think that's generally what happens. Like in my experience, I think they just omit a lot of things from those records so that it's your word against theirs, right? And because there's no jury, right? It's you against the judge. You're literally in an adversarial situation with the judge, and to where if there's no record of what was said, it's your word against theirs. Yeah, there's no culpability there. I think they just omit those conversations that happen.
That won't be in the record. One of the things in my written record that's a lot. They just put 3 dots and say they couldn't hear me. They couldn't hear me. So I made objections, which were important on appeal, but they don't show in the record because the court reporter couldn't hear me. So that's why he had to keep people out of the court, to prevent illicit recording, because he knew very well what he was going to do. And sure enough, right off the bat, he denies me an independent medical exam. So the medical status of this child is the fundamental issue, right? The medical and psychological status of the child. He denies me an independent medical exam. He denies me an independent psychological exam. And the other side didn't even have to give me evidence in discovery, which violates the Discovery Act in California and is grounds for disbarment. I didn't get any discovery in my case, but I had to provide discovery. I provide over 1,000 pages.
See, what he doesn't realize, again, because in his mind, it's all about him. It's all about what he wants, right? So his argument here is this is a test. I want to test the medical and psychological status of the child, and the court saying, no, sir, we're here to test your psychological status, your fitness as a parent in this situation, whether or not you even have access to any of that. Right? That's what they're looking at. They're like, you're the one on trial, not the mom, not the doctor, you, right? This hearing is about seeing whether you're capable, or whether you're fit as a parent. And he's like, oh, no. I want the court to reevaluate my kids. It's not the way it works, but
discovery. That's a lot of work, a week's worth of work. So right off the bat, he goes down this road. Then I noticed a change in him, and I think somebody on the appellate court got to him and said, you're being so unfair to the guy. Let me make my case. I destroyed their witnesses. Then when he...
That's how you know somebody's been very successful in debate, when they claim to have destroyed the opponent.
Comes out with his ruling, he basically removes the gag order, the illegal gag order, because in California, apparently in the appellate court, that's just not going to stand here. They allow free speech here, so that's it. I even, in a very funny moment in the court, forced him to admit that right-wing speech was free speech. He really didn't want to do that. That was pretty funny. So he takes that gag order off. Then he still keeps me on supervised visitation, but he now says phone calls have to be supervised. So a phone call to my kid's going to cost me $500, right? And he says she doesn't have to give the kids your letters. And if you send presents, she doesn't have to give them to the kids. And she doesn't have to tell you anything about their medical or educational or anything. You don't get any notifications at all. So that's what happened. So we go through some post-trial litigation after. They're trying.
So she's been granted sole physical and legal custody, and he has very restrictive visitation, right? They want to see what his interaction with the kids is like. So this is actually getting a pretty good day in court in his case, but he doesn't see it that way.
Get me to pay, I think, $99,000 in legal fees and all this stuff. And
it's a lot of money. I'm not going to say it's not. I had to pay for supervised visits with my kids. So.
It's really about, the family court is really about getting the father to fund all the litigation, because they want the father to go away, basically. So we're doing this post-trial litigation. I file an anti-SLAPP lawsuit. And California has an anti-SLAPP statute which lets you challenge any attempt to silence your speech, and it's mandatory.
I don't think that's true. I think what you said as far as the payment, like in California, parents don't usually have to pay like court filing fees or things like that. There's certain things they do have to pay for, right? But if there is a financial burden, it's put on whoever is the primary, like the major income earner. So you would have to be making significantly more money for you to be charged for anything in those proceedings, right? Otherwise, it would be distributed equally. Yeah.
Or that you get attorney's fees if you win.
Maybe you can prove this. His kid was assigned his identity at birth. No way. I know they do. Yeah, they do that. They're like, they look at it. It's got a penis. They put male on the birth certificate. Yeah, they do that.
So he had to rule on the anti-SLAPP motion. It's mandatory. So what he said was, Mr. Younger admitted in my court, he says, in the ruling, that I just got yesterday morning. Mr. Younger admitted in my court that he is going to continue to be politically active and try to outlaw transgender procedures in California. Mr. Younger's speech, however, political speech, however, has resulted in harassment of plaintiff, my ex-wife.
So his child's mother, according to this, is now being harassed based on him going out and doing podcasts, being politically active, etc. Which indicates to me that he must be giving up her identity, right? Like he doesn't in this interview necessarily. He does give away a lot of information about his kid's identity. He gives away her occupation, a lot of information about the case, to where, yes, an astute person might reasonably be able to find her and target her for harassment, which creates a new set of problems, which is another reason that they don't allow people to talk about a lot of this shit publicly, right? Because now the other parent, the kids potentially could be being harassed. There are people who do that type of shit. Playing with dolls doesn't change your identity. I agree. That is not what being a trans person means at all.
Therefore, it's not covered under the anti-SLAPP statute because his political speech was harassment. He never connects the fact that I'm lobbying for laws or doing interviews like the one I'm doing now to actual harassment of her. I'm sure third parties have harassed her. I believe her when she says it. It's just I'm not harassing her, right? I hardly mention her name, right?
I hardly mention her name, but you do. I believe other people would be harassing her, of course. Why wouldn't they, right? Like, so you you create a situation in which by you coming out and speaking about this case, now you have put the other parties in this case at risk, right? And since you don't know what these other people are going to do, you have no control over them, right? If something happens, right, who's responsible? You're responsible. It's not the other person, it's not the court, right? It's you. Your speech has caused this.
But he used the fact that she had been harassed by third parties who are nameless, but nobody knows who they are, to maintain some of the speech restrictions on me. He's basically said in the ruling, Mr. Younger, if you're going to use your political rights and try to outlaw transgender procedures on kids in California, you can't see your kids. That's basically what the ruling says. And that's where I'm at now. So I'm working.
Wow, some life says play with. Oh no, I lost it. Sorry. Shit. Yeah, Prism won't let me scroll up on these comments anymore. Sure, Wilkes says playing with dolls teaches kids to be caregivers, doctors, nurses, and fashion designers. Right. Boys play with dolls too. They just call them action figures, right? Like, I had a bunch of action figures when I was a kid. I generally have, like fighting and shit like that, but whatever. Like, what's a G.I. Joe? A G.I. Joe is a fucking doll. It's a masculine doll. That doesn't even, I don't even know that's just a crude point you made there. But, I don't think playing with dolls necessarily masculinizes or feminizes a child inherently. Rebuke and Reprove says you conceded sex orientation is just one aspect of one's identity. We say it's not a personal identifier at all. It's behavior based on one's personal choice. Yeah, I think I clarified that earlier, but yeah. So one's sexual preferences can either be accurately reflected in their behaviors, or they can be repressed, leading to, sometimes harmful behaviors. So like, there's, certain people who, like people who have a sexual preference for, I'm trying to think how to word this. So if you are not like somehow realizing your actual sexual preference, then you're probably going to act that out in an unhealthy way. I guess I'll just go back to the example I used earlier, because it's fairly common that you have a gay man who carries on in a heterosexual relationship, right? But he's secretly out there having gay sex all the while, right? And this causes some other bigger problem, right? So rather than just being gay and having to deal with this, now you've masked as a straight person for so long, and then you are caught secretly being gay, right? And it's like double the impact, because now you've hurt these other people that you didn't have to hurt, right? So it doesn't, yeah. So the preference in sexuality is there. It's ingrained. Now, whether you call that an identity, well, yeah, it's an aspect of one's identity. It's not somebody's whole identity. Just like gender isn't their whole identity, their sex life isn't their whole identity, their occupation is not their whole identity. All of these various pieces make up the identity of the person, right? And if one is like in conflict with the other, that creates a conflict in that person's identity, the way they see themselves, the way they are perceived by others. Right? And that's dysphoria, whether it's gender dysphoria or any other type. It's just an aspect of one's identity. I'm not rejecting him by rejecting it. Well, that's a matter of opinion. That's kind of what we're arguing here. Some people would say you would. Some people would say it's one of the most fundamental things that makes them feel acknowledged as a person, like by other people. But not everybody necessarily feels that way. Some people would say, I don't give a fuck, but clearly the people who are affected by it are severely affected by it to a point where it is very distressing for them. So that's kind of what we base the metric on. Is this person claim to be, affected? Do we have anything to legitimize that? Yes, we do, because you can see that, you might not do it, but other people who subscribe to similar ideas, they will therefore go out and, and beat these people up, gay bashing and trans bashing and stuff like that, or in some cases kill them over that aspect of their identity that you choose not to accept, right? Sherlock says, my daughter was in the LGBTQ club in high school and lost her virginity to a girl, but is in a relationship with a mackerel, a male now, and identifies as female pan. Okay. I was like, what? Oh, there's an accidental K in there. Rebuke and Reprove says, if I reject one aspect of his identity, am I rejecting them? Again, that's it's not for me to answer. It's for that person to answer. Like, some people might not care whether you accept it or not, and other people might be deeply offended by your rejection of it. So that's individual to the person you're talking to. I can't answer that for them. The question then is, why are they identifying themselves with what they prefer to have sex with? That's a them problem. Well, again, gender identity is not necessarily correlated to sexual preferences. Those can be two different things. They're not necessarily related at all. Miles Mike says, no, I was talking about my son. Oh.
Working on an election recall on Mark Uhas, because he's done this to several other fathers. So he has a pattern of behavior on the bench of violating parental rights. I'm working on a recall of Gavin Newsom. And in the high desert areas in Southern California, people are not happy with him. And I think we can get a recall election. I don't know if we can win it, but I think we can get a recall election. And I have already prepared model legislation for the California legislature to outlaw these procedures on kids. And we're going to put a lot of grassroots pressure on some of these people to do this. And of course, we're going to have to go head to head with your Senator Scott Wiener. I've always said that if I could ever agree to any transgender operation, it would be to cut Wiener out of the California Senate. That guy needs to go.
Clever pun he made there.
He's going to be our main obstacle. He's politically powerful because he's a donation magnet.
It's a big match, and only the best will win.
Yeah, people love Wiener.
He's going to be our main obstacle. He's politically powerful because he's a donation magnet for big donors who want to push this stuff. Guys like Paul Singer and guys like George Soros. I do think I got some benefit from President Trump's executive order. I was working with his staff and was in contact with them about this, and they promised me that he would do it in the first month, and they did it in the first 3 weeks. It's actually the first time elected officials ever kept a promise to me. And I do think James is not on cross-sex hormones yet. And Children's Hospital has said after Trump's order that if you're already on a treatment plan, we'll keep doing it, but we're not putting any new kids on it. So it may prevent my son from getting cross-sex hormones. And why is that important? If you look at the statistics, every child that goes into cross-sex hormones, 100% of them go to surgery. 100%. It alters.
I don't know if that's true. I'm just going to say I don't believe it. I don't think it is extremely uncommon to have a statistic where something is true 100% of the time. I just don't think that's the case. So.
The brain, and it alters things sufficiently that all of them go to surgery. So keeping my son off cross-sex hormones is my main focus right now. I'm going to also work with 2 senators who have already introduced.
And in fact, I can say I know of multiple trans people who do hormones and don't end up having like bottom surgeries. They may have top surgeries or something that they don't have bottom. So I mean, he's talking about any type of surgery, then I guess, yeah. But I don't know. I still don't think that would be even true in all of those cases.
To allow children who have been victimized by these procedures with a 30-year.
All right, thanks for coming by, Sheriff. It's good to see you. Rebuke and Reprove says not to participate in. I missed some comments there, but we accept all people, but do not celebrate everything someone identifies with. The moral standard, of course, is Scripture. Yeah, I mean, if that's your stance, I mean, then I would say it might be in line with what the Bible says. Now, then we'd have to argue over whether we should believe what the Bible says. But Repeat and Reproof says there isn't a shred of scientific research that demonstrates it's anything more than a sexual preference. I mean, gender dysphoria. Do you agree that psychology is scientific?
Here's statute of limitations, because we don't know the long-term effects of this stuff, to sue the clinics. That long statute of limitations would be enough for most clinics to shut it down because it's too risky legally. I'm trying to get...
Right, so gender dysphoria is a psychological phenomenon, right? And what they demonstrated is that through the process of transitioning and living in one's preferred gender role, right, identifying as that gender is the cure for the dysphoria. And so if a medical intervention is necessary, right, that would be you could say you're doing a medical procedure to intervene on a psychological phenomenon. And I think there's something different about the wiring of the brain in those cases. There's studies about that, like neurodivergence plays into it a lot. My Awesome Life says, speaking about one's gender does not refer to sexual attraction. No, yeah, two totally different subjects.
Yes, Senator Hawley to modify his bill in the federal Congress to allow parents to sue as well. And that's what Trump's executive order calls for. So the Trump has directed the agencies to work with the Congress to make that happen. So all the agencies will assist me in doing that, and I'll be...
I did a really good episode on here probably like 3 years ago, I guess. I was going to pull that one up too to resurface it, but it was an episode where I talked to Uncle Beck and my friend Marie. She went by Marie, but that was her alter or whatever. I think she came out and told her real name on that one. But regardless, so we were having a very interesting conversation on exactly this subject, and we're talking about kind of the intricacies of sexual preference and how it changes over time and with different people, right? And so if you're like pansexual, you might be attracted to any person based on certain characteristics, regardless of their gender or the way they present.
I'll be there next month in DC, working on that. So basically what's happened is my ex-wife generated more leftist political power in Texas and California than I was able to produce. She produced more political power than me and was able to eventually, after 10 years, chemically castrate my son. So what I'm gonna have to do is generate even more political power in order to try to keep him off cross-sex hormones. And that's basically where I'm at right now.
Heartbreaking story.
Yeah.
How's your mental health?
Well, there's some things I've learned. I remember sitting in a deposition facing Jessica Janicek, who was the top attorney from Coons Fuller. She's a specialist in removing fathers from children's lives. She has a technique for getting every father onto supervised visitation. Took her a long time with me, but she eventually got me. I was in a deposition, and she was using incredibly insulting language about my children and other things. And I realized she was trying to bait me to act like a man. And if I acted like a man, they can say I'm a...
And again, when he says act like a man, he means being aggressive and confrontational, and so...
Abusive. Yeah. And I realized that being calm was a weapon that I could use.
Fentanyl
This
wasn't
man's just learning
invited,
about stoicism.
but it's here. Those pills that look like Adderall and Oxy...
Was a weapon.
It's not anti-masculine, it's just stoic. The Stoics have been saying this for a long time.
Could use. And I can tell you definitely in that California courtroom, my calmness saved me from lots worse. It could have been a lot worse for me from Judge Mark Ulas. But that ability to be calm. And that has actually, I think, had mental health benefits.
I'm sure.
You know, to be under extreme stress and duress, but be able to remain calm.
The way you presented this whole story without getting upset or swearing or anything like that.
Yeah, and I really want to.
Is remarkable.
You probably saw me bite back a few, because I know we're on YouTube, but it's like, so there's that. I think there's there's a sense also of the long game, you know? No matter what happens to James,
the long game is like, regardless of what happens, your kid's still not going to want to talk to you. And that's maybe the saddest part of this story, because you want nothing else but for your kid to just be your kid again. But your kid's not your kid anymore. Like this, you've lost that whole battle.
There's nothing that no mistake he can make that's so bad, he can't get to heaven. He can always get to heaven, right?
So as long as he gets his soul redeemed and goes to heaven, that's fine, yeah.
And so you have to have a sense of proportion. It's a temporary life we lead here. I believe in a life that transcends this life. And if you have a belief...
Well, that's very unfortunate, because you're fucking off your whole lifetime with your child for a supposed transcendent life that you believe in. Man.
Like that, you take things seriously, but not too seriously. You know what I'm saying? So my son's, the condition of my son's spirit is more important to me than his body, put it that way. And so
more likely than not, your kid's going to hell, right? Your kid's trans already at this age, living in California. Your kid's going straight to hell.
I'm playing the long game. And I mean, I'm 60, you know, well, I'm almost 60. And, you know, I just want to be around long enough to help him over that. I want to leave him a legacy to get started on. I want his brother to keep some of the awesome character traits that his brother Jude, and build on those things. So I'm just playing the long game, and I think that helps. I have, you know, my dad used to tell me, you know, like when things are really bad and you just have lost hope and stuff, you know, like when I was not a very good boxer at first, and for some reason I didn't have good perception. You know, it kind of, my dad could never quite figure out why, but I was a real powerful hitter, but I would get hit a lot. So, and I would get real frustrated. My dad said, look, you can't despair over this stuff, right? He said, anytime you feel like you just are lost, just make your situation 1% better.
What I heard there was like, oh, I could hit good, but I was just a little bit slow and I kept getting hit a lot. I don't know. That's what I heard. I'm like, okay, it doesn't sound like a great boxer to me, but my awesome life says he's powerful because he's openly gay and a political PowerPoint. Wiener, yeah. This Prism chat is delayed 45 minutes behind the YouTube chat. Wow, that's crazy. I don't know. It's been doing all kinds of weird shit lately. And I got some messages to them about changing, I don't know. They're changing shit over at Prism all the time.
Just 1% better. And all the despair will go away because you realize tomorrow you can do another percent. You know? And when you understand that attitude that my dad gave me, I think, has really helped me, because, you know, when I'm down, I just get to work and make the situation 1% better for James. And that could mean anything from writing him a letter, putting it online. It could mean saying prayers for my son, which I do every day. It could mean talking to elected officials. It could mean taking calls from I get hundreds of calls a month from other parents going through this stuff, asking me for advice about how to deal with the courts, and because it's completely contrary to what the lawyers will tell you. You know, and I always say, save James, save thousands of children. He's not the only one. So I just try to make things 1% better, and I don't sink into despair if I do that. You know what I mean?
Save the children. And that's what we're left with here. So, and I'm going to have to end this one. I got a late start. We'll come back and look at this other video next time. But that was kind of, you know, that's what I was looking at. I was listening to these a while back. I happened to listen to both of these episodes back to back. And it just made me, you know, think a lot about my experiences in the family courts and a lot of the issues that are going on right now. And so I thought it was an interesting incident to note, and maybe we'll research other developments in this story. You know, it's a California issue now, so, but it's also a national issue, and it's a moral issue. Something that we have a lot of discussions here and debates on the internet about, and like it or not, you know, it's not something that's going away. Transgenderism, transhumanism, right? These movements are gaining a lot of traction. I don't think it's something that you're going to dismiss easily, and it's something that is interesting to learn about people and the way that we interact with the world in different ways. So that's kind of my hot take for today. But anyway, like I said, I gotta go. I got a shift tonight. So much love. Be well and stay trusty, and always be kind. And see you later.